Hi, my name's Keith Pock. I'm the Regional Vice President for VALIC for the Western United States. We're here today to talk about retirement income strategies. In fact, we ran this seminar at the most recent CASBO annual conference and had over 40 attendees come in and participate in the seminar. With me today are two of our California district managers, David Creech from the San Francisco Bay Area, who's on the CASBO Associate Member Committee, and Orlando Bachararo, who resides in Sacramento and manages the North State of California. Today we're going to talk about four key areas. The first are new retirement realities. These are areas that how retirement has changed for individuals versus over prior years. Then we're going to talk about 5 key risks of retirement that can derail a person's successful and retirement and having a high level of satisfaction in their retirement life. Third, we're going to talk about how you go about planning for providing income in retirement. And fourth, we'll talk about options that you have of where do you go from here? What do you do with the information that we've talked about today? When we talk about new retirement realities, there are several elements that have changed over the years. First, people are retiring with higher personal debt. This is probably one of the most dramatic changes that we've seen in today's retirees. In fact, many people today retire servicing a mortgage. In fact, many of them have taken equity out of their homes to help their children go to college, or they've refinanced their loan taking advantage of today's lower interest rates, which is great because it lowers your payment. But now you have debt service for potentially another 15, 20, 25, as much as even 30 years. You know, I think of my grandparents, for example, retired, house completely paid for, no debt whatsoever. Same with my folks. When they retired, very little personal debt. Today, significant amounts of debt service, which stresses the income needed in retirement. Additionally, we're living much longer in retirement. We're funding retirements often for as many years as we spent working, 20, 25, 30, and even more years than that will be spent in retirement, which creates a greater responsibility for saving money so that you have supplemental income to replace buying power as we grow older in retirement. And then lastly, Social Security and pension benefits. How you choose to take your pension, very important. If you're Social Security eligible or you have a spouse or significant other that's Social Security eligible, when to take those Social Security benefits is a key decision that will impact your retirement. Next, we're going to talk about 5 critical risks that people face in retirement. Those risks are longevity. That's the fact that we're living much longer, as I mentioned. The second is healthcare risk, the cost of healthcare that we'll have to pay out of pocket in retirement, and how we choose to insure ourselves against healthcare costs that we'll face in retirement. Next, we'll talk about the impact inflation has over a long period of a retirement span. Next, we'll talk about investment risk, also commonly referred to as market risk. This is a risk that most of us identify with when we hear the word risk. We often think about investment or market risk. That's the fact that the market goes up and down and impacts the total value of our savings. And then lastly, we'll talk about withdrawal risk. How do we go about identifying the proper amounts that we can withdraw and still have enough money to live throughout our retirement? Never run out of money. That's a key fear that consumers face when considering their retirement. So I'm going to start by talking about longevity risk. Orlando, why don't you talk a little bit about longevity risk, how it impacts people's retirement, and things that they can do to offset that risk?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's appropriate to talk about longevity first here because it really is a multiplier of the other 4 risks we're about to review. If you think of retirement as a 5-year phenomenon, the other 4 risks become not as important. If you think of it as a 30-year phenomenon, though, the other 4 risks become something you need to be very well aware of and need to be thinking about all the time. You know, I think we all know that people are living longer. We hear it all the time. In fact, one of the best examples I can think of is on Good Morning America. They used to celebrate people who turned 100. I don't think they do it anymore now because so many people are turning 100. Yeah. In fact, I think you told me yesterday there were 55,000 people in America that are over 100.
That's right.
And that number is just continuing to grow. And longevity, as far as running out of money, when we think of retirement, is the #1 fear after healthcare among pre-retirees. So it is something that is on everybody's mind and something we need to think about. I think one of the ways you combat it is you first have to have a very strong budget going into retirement. You have to know what your expenses are going to be, and you have to think about those on a year-by-year basis. And then you have to compare those to your income. You have to have a really good handle on how the income and the expense works, your budget. The other thing is longevity translates into things you have to do investment strategy-wise. Again, if you think of longevity, or if you think of retirement as a 5-year process, you can get away with putting your money into very safe investments once you retire and just living off of the interest. But if you think of it as a 30-year process, imagine having retired 30 years ago and giving up all the gains that were available in the market. You would have given up a lot. And so you have to do that going forward. If you think you're going to live a long time, and most people are, you've got to invest appropriately. I think the last thing you have to do there is you've got to seek advice from a professional. You've got to work with somebody who can help you put all this together and work through all these different items that will impact you over the next 30 years.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I know. I talked to a retiree recently who said, he really spent a lot of time when he was working taking care of his body. He was very physically fit, he said, but he said, now in retirement, I have to be financially fit because I know I'm going to live a fairly long time given my family's history. And so that whole financial fitness was a big concern of his. So yeah, great, Orlando, appreciate that. Next, let's move to healthcare risk. Certainly, healthcare is in all the news media today. We've had the recent passage of the Affordable Care Act, and so a lot of ongoing conversation about healthcare and what it means to consumers and the various choices that they have. But this is a significant risk that people face in retirement, and they have a lot of decisions to make around how they'll manage their health throughout their retirement lifespan. So, Dave, why don't you talk a little bit about our healthcare risk?
Healthcare risk refers to an individual's ability to pay for health insurance and other out-of-pocket medical expenses. And feeding into that is the fact that the inflation factor related to the medical component of the economy is growing at a much greater rate than the general economy as a whole. And it's to the point where an average couple entering retirement can expect to spend upwards of $300,000 out of pocket over the course of their lifetime covering medical expenses that aren't provided through the major source, which is Medicare. Medicare was not designed to cover all medical expenses, so in addition to that, an individual may choose to purchase supplemental insurance and to cover the gaps that Medicare does not provide. In addition, long-term care is very popular, and a person can purchase long-term care generally to cover the types of things that aren't covered through other medical expenses, and these are generally defined as our activities of daily living. And finally, if someone chooses to do it themselves and just pay it out of pocket, that $300,000 obligation can loom very large and requires upfront planning, very detailed look at how they're going to address it, tied in with what Orlando was saying about longevity, and coming up with an actual detailed plan.
Yeah, and the $300,000 is about what the average couple would spend out of pocket through say a 30-year retirement. So it's a significant amount of money that, and I think when we look at our retirement savings, we often don't say, well, that significant of a percentage needs to be sort of set aside to pay for healthcare expenses that we're going to incur in retirement. So
that's absolutely right.
And if I could add, the $300,000 average, again, is for medical premiums and prescription drugs. If you get into a long-term care situation, the cost could go up significantly. My father-in-law was 10 years with in-home care at $40,000 a year. So right there, just that expense alone was an extra $400,000.
Yeah, it's huge. So very important considerations to think about. How are you going to cover those potential healthcare concerns in retirement and pay for it? Our next risk that we face in retirement is inflation. Really like this Yogi Berra quote, it's a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. The future ain't what it used to be. And really that's kind of true when you think about inflation and how inflation impacts retirement savings. And Orlando, why don't you talk a little bit about inflation risk and what consumers can do to offset that risk in retirement?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something you have to take into account because, over a long period of time, inflation will become a factor. It really all it is the increase of costs of goods and services. When you go to the supermarket and you buy a gallon of milk, they don't tell you, hey, this is now 2% more than what it was last year. But it is. It's going up every year, and everything goes up at different costs. That's something that I think people need to realize. For gasoline, I use the example of my situation because when I graduated from high school in 1982, I remember vividly paying $1 for a gallon of gasoline. I filled up a couple days ago, and it wasn't $1, it was 4 times that amount. So that's something that needs to be built into your plan, as I stressed earlier. When you're talking about expenses, those expenses have to increase every year. I see a lot of financial plans that are built by financial advisors around the country from different companies, and oftentimes you'll see expenses in those plans that are constant over retirement. And that's just not the way it is. Things will go up, and different things will go up at different costs. You mentioned inflation on different levels. I saw something yesterday that natural gas over the last 12 months in the country has gone up 11.8%, just that item alone. And that needs to be accounted for in your plan when you look at expenses versus income. I think the other thing is portfolios have to be built to have an inflation component in them. Many of them are not. We think of portfolios and asset allocation as being diversified, and that should take care of inflation. But there's certain things that emphasize inflation protection more than others. REITs, tips, and commodities are the kinds of things that will do that over a long period of time.
Yeah, no doubt inflation's important. I know the other day I was driving down the freeway and I saw a sign for a kind of a famous motel chain, and it said $69.99 or something for a night. And I remember that same hotel chain when I was in high school was $6 a night. And then I remember when I started in my working career and started traveling around, it was about $39 a night. So it's gone from $6 to $39 to now $69. That's the impact of real inflation, and it's on those staple goods. It's, when you think about inflation on average of all goods and services, it's pretty low. But what is it on transportation and healthcare? Healthcare is over 7% inflation when today we're very, very low inflation rates, under 3%. So it's definitely a risk that has to be incorporated in your planning for developing a retirement income strategy. Next, let's move to investment risk. And this is really often referred to as market risk. And I think when a consumer thinks about risk, this is the one they all know about, right? This is the market goes up and down, and I might make money or I might lose money, and it creates fear and anxiety for people. So this is the risk that most of us associate with, rather than these other risks, which are very, very, very important. Dave, talk about market risk and how we overcome market risk in our retirement income strategy.
Well, investment risk is really the chance that the actual returns that we get will be less than we expect. And as investors, what we really seek is some sort of expectation, some sort of rate of return that we can count on to meet our obligations. And as investors, we generally classify each other from conservative through moderate to aggressive. And about the only way that we can guarantee a rate of return is to take very little risk. And if we take very little risk, the rate of return is going to be small. And it may be so small that it doesn't even keep up with inflation. In fact, you could be having moderate growth in these no-risk investments, yet still be losing ground in purchasing power. On the other end of the spectrum, we could take more risk and potentially get greater returns, but also we must be willing to address the fact we could also have significant losses. So what's the answer? The way we address market risk is through diversification. And a word about diversification, many times people will come to me and they'll tell me that they're well diversified, and when we look at their situation, we see that in their mind, diversification may mean that their money is at 2 or 3 different investment companies. I'm diversified. Or if we look at their holdings, we might find they have 3 or 4 mutual funds, and those mutual funds may be all large company growth stocks, growth funds. And what happens is, because of that positive correlation with each, if the market goes up, they're all going to go up. And if the market goes down, they're all going to go down as well. So true diversification is investing in various investments that behave in different ways. They may be more negatively correlated. So large cap growth funds, mid cap, small caps, international, maybe bonds, international government holdings, long-term obligations. And by mixing it all, we come up with a much more consistent rate of return. It's not going to protect you from all the downside risk, but over a long period of time, it produces a return we can count on, and that's truly what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I think the other real benefit there is that it reduces the volatility. It reduces risk over time. You're much less likely to ever have to liquidate a variable type of investment at a cost or at a current value below your cost basis. So you're less likely to lose money, which is really the biggest fear that that near retirees and retirees face. And the other mistake that folks make is they're too conservative in retirement, right? If you have a 30-year retirement and you put it in an investment that's earning 2%, inflation, and especially on those staple goods, as Orlando talked about, can be much higher than that. You're losing money even though you don't really see it that way. You're losing buying power, and that's critical, especially if you have a 30 or longer year retirement. So yeah, very, very, very important. The next risk I want to talk about is withdrawal risk, and this is another really, really critical decision that retirees have to make. How do I supplement the income that I need in retirement? How do I supplement my pension or Social Security or the benefits that I'm going to have as a retiree? And the timing of when I take money, where do I take the money, how much do I take? All really critical decisions. The great boxer George Foreman, he said, the question isn't at what age I want to retire, and that's where most of us focus on. I want to retire at 60 or 55 or 67 or whatever, but it's at what income, and that's the critical decision. How much money I can retire, but what will my income be and how long will it last? So Orlando, why don't you talk a little bit about withdrawal risk?
Right, and withdrawal risk is important because if you've got an investment portfolio and you need it to supplement your income to cover your expenses, the withdrawal risk is that you withdraw the money too quickly and you deplete your assets ahead of time. If I could dovetail off of what Dave was talking about in terms of investments, the one thing we do know is that bear markets historically occur every 3 years, right? And so the timing of those withdrawals can also be important. If you take the money out at a time when the market is down and your portfolio is down, that's going to have a very significant impact long-term on your portfolio. So you have to think about those things. Obviously, using guaranteed sources of income keeps you from withdrawing the money out of your portfolio too quickly. And in fact, studies show that if you have a large amount of guaranteed income, you tend to be happier in retirement. So, you're looking at things like STRS and PERS and Social Security and your annuities that pay regular income as being your sources of guaranteed income. If those don't cover your expenses, keeping in theme of this budget, then you're going to have to withdraw money out of your portfolio, and that's where the risk comes in. And so you need to keep a very close eye on the level that you're withdrawing, when you're withdrawing, and making sure that you're not depleting that portfolio over time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called sequence of returns risk, and it's really, really it has a major impact on how long your money will last in retirement. And that brings us to our next thing I want to talk about, which we refer to as essential income planning. And this really gets to the root of how do I take money? What's important? If you watch all the TV commercials that are out there, you think retirement's all about probably, being on a sailboat, racing across the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, or, lounging by the pool on a cruise ship, or, standing under a waterfall in Hawaii or whatever, owning a vineyard. Those are all great things, and, I'm sure we all would love to have that kind of lifestyle in retirement, but the reality is the biggest allocation of our retirement income is going to go to essential needs. And essential needs are where we have to start our retirement income plans. Really a three-step process, I think, to looking at how we develop an income model in retirement. Dave, why don't you talk a little bit about the essential income plan?
Sure. The slide on the screen here really depicts it well as a pyramid. And starting at the bottom is where we define that essential income need. And it's really our basic needs, the things we have to cover: the food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and healthcare. Now, as financial advisors, generally we would expect to have a 70 to 80% chance perhaps of success of the overall plan, but it's critical that this portion be 100%. We have to meet this. We can't afford to only pay 70% of our mortgage. We have to be able to pay it at 100%. And the way we fund those are through our pensions, our STRS and PERS, Social Security, and other types of investments that we can create a guaranteed income stream. So above that, though, we get into that non-essential income need. That's what Keith was talking about, the travel, leisure, hobbies, where all the marketing is focused. And generally, we fund those through mutual funds and annuities and cash and CDs and so on. But also, this is where your 403B and your 457 plans come into play. They were designed to fill in the gap between what STRS and PERS might pay, and it's with your 403B, 457, you can cover these non-essential needs, as well as the top of the pyramid, the legacy. And this is where we leave money for our loved ones and our family. And we handle that through estate planning, through wills, and also through life insurance. So this is just a very simple way of looking at it, but a very powerful way of looking at planning for your essential income.
Yeah, no, I think this is really great. You focus on the essential income needs. Those items: food, shelter, clothing, transportation, healthcare. Those are also those staple goods that are most susceptible to higher rates of inflation than average rates of inflation. So very critical. This last one too, the legacy and generation planning. Far too many people, I think, don't really spend enough time on that. I talk to people all the time when I run financial seminars and classes. Still don't have a will, don't have a trust. No, they should have one, just haven't gotten around to it. Medical directives, same thing. You absolutely want to take care of those simple elements: will or trust, medical directives. Make sure the family members know what your desires are. It takes the burden off them. Frankly, they don't have to make decisions for you, and allows you to really plan for yourself. So really critical. Great information, Dave. Appreciate that. So where do we go from here? Well, our friend Yogi Berra said you have to be careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. And so I think really having a structured plan, Orlando said you've got to have a written plan. That's really critical. And so I think the first thing you do is you really develop a strategy to take care of all of the 5 risks we talked about. First, consider reducing your living expenses, saving more, or working longer. That's really, I think a lot of us when we focus on the age we want to retire without doing all of the work to think about what will the income, how long will I have to likely pay for retirement. You want to be beyond that. We always hear, we hear about the averages when we're talking about longevity, that if you're 60 years old and you're in good health, you're likely to live to age 87. That's an average, and every year, if you build your plan around 87, there's as Orlando said, over 55,000 people alive today at over 100 years old. If you're in that above average group, you've got to plan for that. And what they don't tell you is that life expectancy changes as you get a little older. So if you're 66 and still in good health, it's not 87 anymore, it's beyond that, right? And it moves frankly, every month you live. The IRS tables give us a credit for a longer life expectancy. So really looking at these elements is critical. Secondly, when we're looking at healthcare risk, understand all of your options that you have, and really, take a thoughtful approach to how you're going to cover those expenses, and don't underestimate the impact that can have on your accumulated savings. Third, use a financial plan to protect against inflation. We have some really powerful analytic tools that do diagnostic analysis on what your portfolio is likely to provide in income streams, but everything is based on inflated numbers, what the cost to retire will actually be. We all have kind of a vision of how we want our retirement. What we need to do is get that vision out on the table, put cost estimates on it in current dollars, and then inflate it based on when you're going to retire, of what the cost of funding those, that style of living will be in future dollars, and that's where the planning has to be. It's the old Wayne Gretzky, don't go to where the puck is, go to where it's going to be. That's what these diagnostic tools do. It takes us to where the costs are going to be in the future. Next we talk about diversification. Most of our moms all told us when we were growing up, don't put all your eggs in one basket, or our grandparents told us this, and that's diversification. And to your point, Dave, it's different types of investments. It's not, I have money at Bank A and money at Bank C, and I got some money at investment company A. If it's possible that you'd have all the same investments under those institutions and have zero diversification, because if you're in all large cap stocks, they're always going to behave the same. Large cap stocks go up, they'll all go up. Large cap stocks go down, they'll all go down, with very little really difference between those. So getting different correlated kinds of investment classes based on your risk tolerance and time horizon, that kind of thing, very important. And lastly, determine how much you can safely withdraw from your retirement plan. I would really strongly encourage people to develop an essential income plan. Focus on the 5 staples first, and then move on to the things that I want to do for fun, and then what will my generational legacy be, post death. And so those are really critical areas for people to focus on. I'd strongly encourage you to seek help. You can see financial advisor or attorneys to help you with these kinds of things, but really important to use good, solid analytics and diagnostics to see where you're going to be. And the earlier you do it, the better it is, because the longer time you have, the easier it is to correct for defects. So if there's something that's not quite going to sync up, you have the ability to, to take corrective action and solve for that. That concludes our session today. We really appreciate you watching the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your local VALIC financial advisor or to Dave, Orlando, or myself. Happy to talk to you. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next CASBO conference. We very much appreciate our sponsorship and participation in CASBO. And again, thank you for watching the video. Have a great day.